J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, wrote a short story about a little man who was a painter. He had one big painting in mind. It's kind of a vision for a painting that started out with just a single leaf, and then in his mind expanded into a whole tree out in the country, surrounded by the landscape. And he set out, he expanded this, he spread out this giant canvas in his studio and set out every day to go and paint. But one of the struggles he has in this short story is that he's got this kind heart, and he's always helping people out. People come over to ask for help, and he just can't say no. Tolkien says that as he's working on this painting and people come over, he'll stop and he's being polite and he's listening to what they're talking about and saying, yep, yep, that, And all the while, he's thinking about his paints and his brushes and his painting. And Tolkien says that he's a better painter of leaves than he is of trees. And so a lot of times he's setting out to paint this great big tree, but all he can get out is just a single leaf. In fact, one day he says that his next-door neighbor comes over and asks the little man who's the painter if he can help him out. He says, I've got a leaky roof. Is there anything you can do? And he sees the canvas. He says, that's what I need. Can I have that? That's exactly what will do the trick to patch my roof. He says, that's my canvas. That's my painting. You can't have my painting. And he says, it's a painting? Oh, yeah, I guess. Not a very good one, I guess, but okay. And he says, can I have the canvas? He says, no, it's like my life's work here is doing this painting. You can't have the canvas. And he goes on, and he's working on this painting, and always, at best, he just puts out one good leaf. And at the end of his life, the painter dies, and it says that the next-door neighbor comes over, and he takes the canvas, and he uses it to patch his roof. But somebody else found his leaf. And they said, this is actually an exquisite little leaf. And they took it home, and they framed it, and they hung it up on the wall in one of the walls of their home, and they enjoyed it for years. And then they said, you know what, this is too good a leaf for us to keep to ourselves. And they gave it to a museum, and it hung on the wall of a museum. And some people noticed it, but not everybody. And actually, people who know Tolkien and who are experts in his writing say that it was really kind of an autobiography, and it was about his own struggle with the question of, does any of this matter? Does the work that I'm doing, is it going to amount to anything? Is anybody going to care? People see what I'm doing as he's working on The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Some people look over my shoulder and say, that's not very good, is it? And every once in a while, he's working so hard on this giant project, and all he can put out is a single leaf. And this is a struggle so many of us have when it comes to our work and our vocation and our callings, is feeling like I've got this great aspiration for this big thing I want to do, but I feel like I'm only putting out a leaf when I'm aiming for a whole tree. So this month, we're in a series called Find Your Calling, where we're talking about work and vocation and calling and how God views it. And this morning, we're going to be looking at Nehemiah chapter 1. And Nehemiah is a book about work. Nehemiah is a book that people like to turn to when they're in the middle of a building project at a church, or people who love to roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty love the book of Nehemiah because it's, as much as any other book in the Bible, a book about work. And I want to welcome you here to Victory this morning on what is our kickoff Sunday. Love to see the wide array of colors and teams that are represented here. And we have grace for all people here, including the Dolphins and Steelers fans, even for you. I'm wearing red, white, and blue in honor of my high school, my alma mater, the North Tonawanda Lumberjacks, just outside of Buffalo, in honor of my kids' high school, go Panthers, and because go Bills. And so glad you're here this morning as we have some fun as we kick off fall ministry. We're going to look again, as I said, at Nehemiah chapter 1, starting right at verse 1. Let's jump right into it this morning. It says, the words of Nehemiah, son of Hekeliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, when I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some of the other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, those who survived the exile are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard about these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Nehemiah, this whole book begins with this crisis. They've been in a time of exile. They've been in this time of being away from Jerusalem. And the reports are beginning to come back that as people have made their way back to Jerusalem, that Jerusalem's in shambles. The walls are in complete disrepair. And Nehemiah himself is personally just distraught over this news that the walls are in such shambles. And in due time, he's going to launch about this project that's going to rebuild the walls. Spoiler alert, they're going to rebuild the walls in the course of time throughout this book. But right now, it begins in this moment of sadness and just Nehemiah sitting with this news of the walls being broken down. And he's about to launch into the work. And when I think about our work and the work that we do as we're talking about that this month, we put together this chart that I hope helps to help you visualize what your life's work looks like. I adapted this from somebody else who started this, and I took some adaptations to it. And we begin with one of the main areas of work for you is your job or school. This is the stuff that you have to do. You have to earn a living, or if you're 15 years old, you have to learn something at some point. And so school or job at one time or another is going to be a big part of the work that dominates our life. And in different seasons of our life, work or school is going to be a bigger part of that. So that's the first thing. The second area is chores. And this, again, is something that you have to do. And your chores are those things like mowing the lawn and doing the dishes and cooking meals and changing diapers and weed whacking and picking up after the dog, all those things that aren't particularly fun but are a part of the work that are just a normal part of and routine of life. The third area is volunteering. And this is work that you get to do. The first two areas are things that you have to do. This is an area of things that you get to do. And sometimes it doesn't even feel like work, but it is work. This is areas like serving in Victory Kids, or serving in Victory Student Ministries, or being an usher or greeter, or helping in the parking lot, or helping to coach a basketball team or a soccer team, or reading books to kids at the library, reading hour at school. A number of ways that you can volunteer your time. And this is often a big part of work. And these three areas altogether constitute your life's work. Your life's work is a combination of these three factors at one time or another. And at any given slice of time, at this particular point in time, you might say that right now my life's work is dominated by school. I'm in 12th grade, I'm taking college level courses, and I'm just dominated by schoolwork right now. I come home from school, I got to do homework all night. That's a major slice of your life's work at this particular moment. Or you might say, I'm retired, I've got a pension, or I'm collecting Social Security. I don't have to work for my income anymore, so I've got some time for all the chores I've got to do. And my chores make up going to the doctor's appointments, or being a caregiver, or all the other things that come about. Or you might say, I've got some time right now. And right now, the biggest circle of my life's work right now in this particular moment is volunteering. I get to give of my time. I've got the luxury of time that a lot of other people don't have. And so at different times or another, the biggest circle of your life may look different than it does at a different time. And over the course of your lifetime, all of your life's work, when we think about the grand sum of your life's work, it's going to be all taking place within one of these three circles. And then beyond that, you've got your whole life. And outside of your work, I hope that you've got time for other things. Life is more than just the work we've got to do. And I hope you've got time for apple cider. I hope you've got time for playing with puppies. I hope you've got time for watching Monday Night Football and for going for walks on the beach and all sorts of those wonderful things that make life rich and meaningful. But your calling will not exist in leisure. When you're looking for your calling is always going to be in one of those three main areas of work, whether that's job or school, or whether that's chores, maybe it's caregiving, being a homemaker, or in the volunteering you do. Your calling is always going to exist in one of those three areas. And maybe this is a really important thing for me to say, that your calling may not be attached to a paycheck. I'm going to say that louder for the people in the back. Your calling may not necessarily be tied to a paycheck. In fact, for most people, through all time, most people around the world, their calling is not tied to how they make their living. I've got to do this thing in order to make a living. I've got to do this thing in order to put food on the table. I've got to do this job in order to provide for my family. But my calling, that's something entirely different. My calling is something I get to do. And so when we think about your calling and your vocation, maybe that kind of language helps you to be able to describe to people when they ask you, what do you do? You might say, well, I do this, but my calling is this. This is what I do for a living, but my calling, my vocation is over here. My vocation in this season is to be a homemaker. And when we think about our life's work, God has three main intentions for our life's work. And the first one is this, that God's plan for work is to benefit others. This means that God's original intent for work is to be a blessing, to bless other people and to be a benefit to other people. And because of this means that your life's work, the work that you do, the job that you have, could take there's a whole range of options available to us. You can be a teacher, a truck driver, a business owner. You might even be able to be a politician. You just got to be a good one. You just got to be an honest one about it. There are whole lots of things that we can do that when you can draw a connection between what you do and how it benefits others, that's an option available to us. That also means there are some things that are off the table for us. I don't believe a Christian can be a drug dealer. I don't believe a Christian can do anything that is actively harming or taking advantage of another person, because God's plan for our work is to benefit someone else. Number two is that God's plan for work mixes human creativity and God's blessing. That in God's plan for work, it's like we take the creativity of God and he invites us in to be creative with him and to join our creativity with his creativity. Some people have said God's plan for work is to bring him glory. There's always going to be some limits to that, of course. And often in my line of work in particular, it's easy to confuse those lines. It's why one of my seminary professors years ago urged us budding preachers to be careful how we respond when people compliment our preaching once in a while. He said, when somebody says, good sermon, pastor, don't say, oh, it was the Lord, because just say thank you, was his advice to us. He told us a story about a pastor who had finished preaching one Sunday morning, went out in the lobby, and somebody came up to the pastor and said, great sermon, pastor. And he said, oh, it's the Lord, it's all the Lord. And the person said, wasn't that good? We get to partner with God in our work, whatever our work is. It won't always be that good, but we get to join in God with the blessing that he can provide to our work. And the third area, maybe the most important, is that God's plan for work is to make you say, I was made for this. To say, man, I was made, I feel like I'm right in the palm of God's will for my life. I'm doing something that I'm good at. Of course this is what I'm doing. That's God's original intent for your work, whether that's in the realm of chores or your career or in the volunteering that you do, that you've got something in your life, some work that you're contributing where you say, man, I was made for this. That's why when you visit people in the nursing home or visit people who are in the hospital for a long time and you ask them how they're doing, one of the things they'll often say is that they wish that they had something to do. They're frustrated that they don't have anything to contribute. You can only watch so many movies and watch so much TV and read so many magazines and play so many board games before you just have this drive to be a part of something, to contribute something, to make a difference. Tim Keller said it this way. He said, according to the Bible, we don't merely need the money from work to survive. We need the work itself to survive and to live fully human lives. This is why unemployment is so devastating to people. When the ability to work or your job is taken away, it's so soul-crushing to people because we have this God-given need. It's in our internal wiring to contribute, to produce something that's benefiting other people, and it makes us feel like I was made for this. In fact, last week I shared how 33% of retirees find retirement dissatisfying. And Harvard has found that it's beneficial for retirees to keep working past the age of 65 because of this factor, to have something that they're contributing to. But when they look at the 66% of retirees who are enjoying retirement and 33% who aren't, you know what the single biggest difference is? Are they volunteering? Are they doing something that is helping somebody else? If they're volunteering their time, they tend to enjoy retirement a whole lot better. If they're not, then they tend to find it dissatisfying. One group has even quantified the impact that, put a dollar amount on the impact that volunteering has. They said that volunteering one time a week has the impact on your well-being, your emotional well-being, as going from $20,000 of annual income to $75,000 of annual income. That volunteering one time a week has the impact, it registers on your soul the way that an extra $55,000 would register on your soul if your annual income was $20,000. In totally unrelated news, if you'd like to serve here at Victory, you can go to victoryhighway.com/serve. And we won't even charge you. You can do it for free. But in all seriousness, this is a huge deal in our lives. And we need you to serve here. We got lots of opportunities for you to serve here in ways that you know you're going to make a big difference. But not as pastor, as your friend. Try it. We don't just need you to serve. By the way, as putting my pastor hat back on, we don't just need you to serve here at Victory. We need you to serve in the community. We need you to serve at the school. We need you to coach basketball and soccer and to be that kind of coach who's concerned more about character development than the scoreboard. We need you to be the kind of person who's investing in people and making a difference and listening and caring for people. And I'm telling you, if you're not volunteering, if volunteering is not a part of your calendar, it's a $55,000 impact on your soul. Don't miss out on this. It's a huge impact on your soul. So, but in all seriousness, at victoryhighway.com/serve, you can see all sorts of ways that you can serve here at Victory. And we've got lots of opportunities, lots of places where you can serve based on what your particular gift mix is. Well, J.R. Tolkien, in that story about the little painter, he was a Christian. And the story doesn't end with that little painting of a leaf ending up in the museum. It says that the painter goes on to the next country. He goes on to heaven. And there he's being shown around, and he comes across something that it's almost like deja vu. He has this sense of familiarity with something. It looks so familiar, and he can't put his finger on it. And then he realizes it's his tree. He comes across in heaven his tree in the new country. And it blows him away that this tree that had always been in his heart that he'd been trying to paint, he could only paint a leaf of from time to time. Here it was, and he could climb its branches. He could sit in its shade. There was a real tree. And one person who was reflecting on this short story says, this is so critical for us who are believers when we approach our work to understand that there is a God who is healing the world, and there is a real tree. Whatever your work is, it's contributing to something that's bigger than you. Whatever your work is, you may feel it sometimes like maybe does it even matter? I'm only able to eke out a leaf here or there, but there is a real tree, and your work is contributing to something far bigger than you can possibly begin to dream or imagine. So, your work is meant to have you say, I was made for this. It may or may not be attached to a paycheck, and work is a big part of God's plan for us. Throughout this series, we're taking time to hear some stories, some testimonials from people within our own body about how this is playing out in their own life. And this morning, I want to invite you to take a moment and listen to this testimony from Kevin and Jalin Na. Take a look.
Hello, my name is Kevin Na, and this is my wife, Jalin.
Hello.
We have been a part of Victory for about 14 years since we first moved to this region, where I found a job as a corporate lawyer for the local big company here. But part of our story is a little bit unique in that we were sent by my company to Taiwan for 7 years, and we only returned last summer. Maybe one of the unique things about our story is that Jalin and I were both called into the ministry when we were students, as college students. Jalin wanted to be a medical missionary, and I wanted to use my law degree to go abroad and preach the gospel in some way. But while we got busy having kids and pursuing our careers and climbing the corporate ladder, that vision sort of faded. But then 8 years ago, my boss said, I'm sending you to Taiwan. And that was like a second chance to pursue our calling. And what happened there was we joined a church that really needed someone to come in and minister to students, and eventually to lead the entire international congregation. And the senior pastor wanted to focus on the Chinese congregation and asked us to help lead that church. And when we did that, it really felt like God was giving us a chance to regain that calling, or to answer that call that he had given us before. One of the verses that really helped us during that time is Romans 8:28, which says, for all things work for good for those who love God and who are called according to his purpose. I think sometimes we focus on the loving God part, but we forget about the part where we have to be called to his purpose. And when we connect with that purpose, which, like Jalin shared, is to make disciples of all nations, then all things will work together for good, even through the mundane, even through setbacks in your career or disappointments in life. And we really found that to be true for us in Taiwan, as we saw so many families come to know God and get baptized and saved.
When we first joined the church in Taiwan, there was no kids ministry, and I had previously been a volunteer of Victory Kids Church, and I saw how excellently everything was done here at Victory. And so I think that experience helped prepare me to lead kids ministry in our international congregation church in Taiwan. Through that, we saw entire families being ministered to, and entire families being saved and baptized, and lives being transformed. And we are really thankful for the opportunity to serve the Lord through our church in Taiwan. And one of our mottos when we were in Taiwan was that our family is on mission. We were a family on mission. It wasn't just about Kevin or me or about his job, but it was really, we felt really strongly that our whole family was sent there by God to be a family on mission. And it was indeed through our children's friends that we got to know a lot of non-Christians, and it was through befriending our children's friends' families that we were able to serve them and share God's love with them. And that was how many families were led to the Lord. I learned that the calling of God is not just in my career, but in fact, I found God's calling when I was in Taiwan, when I wasn't working as a doctor, because I was able to focus on who I was in Him and what He had called me to do. And I believe His call for everyone is to go and make disciples in Matthew 28, verse 18.
While in Taiwan, we had a chance to minister to a lot of students, including college students and youth group, and we would teach them that you should pursue a career and not just a job. But greater than that, you should pursue a calling rather than a career. And to pursue a calling, you have to know the caller. And God knows you by name. In John 10, Jesus said that I am the good shepherd and I know my sheep by name. And so it's really comforting to know that God knows who you are and has a specific call for your life. When you know that calling that drives meaning and purpose in everything you do, even in the mundane things of the daily habits and daily rituals that you go through in whatever your field is in life. And that really gave us a sense of meaning while we were in our secular careers in Taiwan or in the ministry field. And we would encourage that for everyone to really get to know the caller and find that calling for you and to live a life full of meaning and purpose.
I love how Kevin and Jolyn are able to tell that story and express how, as a lawyer and a doctor, going on this, being reassigned overseas, how that became their calling became more than just their job. That their calling became something that wasn't tied to their paycheck. It was something that God had called them to, and the deep purpose that came from that. I even love the way they say that it was our whole family on mission. It wasn't just one of us. Our whole family seeing this is our response to the call of the caller on our lives to go and make disciples. So for you, how do you find your calling, though? You know how to find a job. Maybe you know how to find a career. How do you find your calling? Well, that's where I think Nehemiah is a help to us. And in the next chapter of Nehemiah chapter 2, this is where we see. It says, in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when the wine was brought before him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. Nehemiah was the cupbearer for the king. He'd be the one to bring it, make sure it wasn't poisoned for the king. And he said, I had not been sad in his presence before. So the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you're not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of the heart. And I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? The king said to me, so what is it that you want? Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it. And then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, how long will your journey take? And when will you get back? And it pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. So Nehemiah is there in front of the king. He needs permission to go, and he asks for his blessing to return. And right in this moment, before any bricks have been picked up, before any trowels have been acquired, before any trips to Home Depot or Lowe's or to Corning Building Company, before any of that has been done, it starts with this heartbreak that Nehemiah has for his home city, for the wall around the city. And when you find your hobbies, you'll find your hobbies when you find something that you enjoy. You'll find a job when you find something that somebody's willing to pay you to do. You'll find a career when you find a job that means more to you than a paycheck. You'll find chores when you wake up in the morning. You'll find volunteering opportunities when you offer up your schedule and your time to other people and things that go beyond you. Your life's work will be constituted by your job, your schooling, your career, by your volunteer opportunities, and by the things you've got to do around your house. But your calling is different. Your calling is unique, and this is really, really important. Please catch this. Callings usually grow on the other side of heartache. If you're looking for your calling, you'll find your calling where you've got a broken heart. You'll find your calling in that area where something has broken your heart, and callings like flowers usually grow on the other side of a heartache. Callings grow in those areas where something has just devastated us and made us is absolutely devastated by the state of things, and we need to step in. We need to make a difference. Some people experience callings with an audible voice. That's a pretty rare way to experience a calling, but some people experience a calling with an audible voice. But for most of us, it's a convergence of factors and people speaking into our lives and things that set us up that we just feel like our life is kind of funneling us in one direction, and how can we do anything different? To borrow a line from Ruth Haley Barton, she says, "This is something I can't not do for reasons I'm unable to explain to anyone else and don't fully understand myself." There's this sense of, my heart is broken over this thing. I have to do it. How can I do anything else? When you find the right work, you'll say, I was made for this. But when you find your calling, you'll say, this has broken my heart. I have to do this. I can't not do this. And so Nehemiah goes to his countrymen in verse 17, and this is what he says. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let's rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. And they replied, let's do it. Let's start rebuilding. And so they began this good work. So they go back to Jerusalem. They rebuild the wall. There's going to be a lot of discouragement. There's going to be a lot of heartache. But anything worth doing is worth being discouraged about. And Nehemiah has found his calling. And he found it on the other side of heartache. So now what about you? As you think about those three areas where your life's work takes place, and job or school, and chores around the house, and volunteering opportunities, where is your calling residing? What has broken your heart? As Tolkien tells that story about the painter who's his whole life painting leaves, hoping that one day they'll get assembled into a tree, and then at the end of his life, it enters into heaven, and the new country is able to see the whole tree as he's been planning on all along. What does that look like for you? As you look back on your life, when you're 95 years old, if you were to look back, what would you say, yeah, that's my life's work. That was my calling. I contributed something significant. There's a sociologist named Tony Campolo who, a few years ago, interviewed 50 95-year-olds. And he assembled this cross-section of 95-year-olds and just asked them a series of questions. And he asked them, if they could live their lives over, what would you do different? And he said that there are three main answers that they gave, and he distilled all their answers down to these three main areas, asking these 50 95-year-olds, what would you do different if you could live your life over? And the first answer was, if I could live my life over, I'd reflect more. I'd take time and I'd stop, and I wouldn't just live in autopilot. I wouldn't just do things by reflex. I'd stop and I'd think about what I'm doing. I'd take time to reflect on my life more. Second answer was, I'd risk more. Their biggest regrets were not the risks that they had taken that had not paid off. Their biggest regrets were the risks that they didn't take, the times when they'd played it safe. It said, I'd risk more. I'd take more risk. I'd venture out there. I'd take a little bit more of a gamble with the opportunities. I would definitely risk more. And the third thing was, I'd spend my life on things that will outlast me. 95 years old, looking back on their life, they'd say, I wish that I had spent more of my life on things that were going to outlast me. So what about you? Do you think ahead to when you're 95 years old, and if somebody came and asked you, what would you do different? If you could do anything different with your life, what's a risk that you can take today that will invest in something that will outlast you? What's a risk that you can take this year, this month, this week, that 95-year-old you will be so proud of you for taking? What's a risk that you can take that will make an investment in things that you know will outlast you? And only you can answer that question. Only you can know what those risks might be for you. But when you're looking for your calling, look where your heart is broken. Because callings often grow on the other side of heartache. Lord, we hear you calling. We thank you for the gift of work in all the forms and expressions it takes. For some of us, we need to take a deep breath before we thank you for work, because there's a lot of work right now. But we thank you for the gift of work, that you didn't just plop us down on clouds to play harps all day long, but that even in the garden in the beginning, before the fall, you gave Adam and Eve work. to give them meaning and purpose. And we consecrate our tasks to you now. The work that lies before us this week, the work that lies before us this year. And Lord, would you shine a spotlight for us on the calling you have for us. Some of us know that we know deep in the marrow of our bones what our calling is, and we can do nothing else. But others are searching for their calling, and Lord, I just pray that you'd make it so clear to them, show them where you've broken their heart the way that your heart is broken, where you're going to take their gifts and their abilities, their temperament, and their experiences, and put that to use for your glory and for your name's sake and for the benefit of others. Lord, help us to not reach the end of our lives and feel like we left a lot in the tank, that there were risks that were untaken, that there were opportunities that were left uncaptured. Call us, Lord, and we'll go. Here we are. Send us. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.